Hello everyone, I'm Yazan Ibrahim, or as some of you might know me, Yazan Abu Ghosh. Today we embark on a deep and foundational exploration within the realm of internal auditing. Welcome! In this extensive session, we are going to dedicate our focus to a cornerstone of our profession, Domain II, Ethics and Professionalism from the IIA's Global Internal Audit Standards. This isn't just a set of guidelines, it's the very essence of what it means to be a trusted internal auditor. The principles and standards we will dissect today replace the IEA's former code of ethics and meticulously outline the behavioral expectations for all professional internal auditors. This includes chief audit executives, CAEs, every individual auditor, and indeed any entities that provide internal audit services. Why is this domain so critical? Conformance with these principles and standards is what instills trust in the profession of internal auditing. It's what creates and nurtures an ethical culture within the internal audit function itself, and fundamentally, it provides the solid basis for stakeholders to rely on our work and our professional judgment. It's important to emphasize that all internal auditors are required to conform with these standards of ethics and professionalism, even if internal auditors are also expected to abide by other codes of ethics, behavior, or conduct, perhaps those specific to their organization or another professional body. Conformance with the principles and standards contained herein is still absolutely expected. And let's be clear, the fact that a particular behavior might not be explicitly mentioned in these principles and standards does not by any means preclude it from being considered unacceptable or discreditable. Our ethical compass must always be active. While each internal auditor is responsible for their own individual conformance, the chief audit executive plays a pivotal role. The CAE is expected to support and actively promote conformance with the principles and standards in this ethics and professionalism domain. This is often achieved by providing opportunities for training, ongoing guidance, and fostering an environment where ethical conduct is the norm. The CAE may choose to delegate certain responsibilities for managing conformance, but ultimately the CAE retains accountability for the ethics and professionalism of the entire internal audit function. Over the next hour, we will meticulously unpack the 5 core principles of this domain and their associated standards and requirements. Our goal is to not just understand these standards, but to internalize them so they become an integral part of our professional identity and practice. So let's begin our deep dive into the ethical and professional heart of internal auditing. Principle 1, demonstrate integrity. We start with what is arguably the bedrock of our profession. Principle 1, demonstrate integrity. The standard states internal auditors demonstrate integrity in their work and behavior. What does integrity truly mean in our context? The IIA defines integrity as behavior characterized by adherence to moral and ethical principles, including demonstrating honesty and the courage to act based on relevant facts, even when facing pressure to do otherwise, or when doing so might create potential adverse personal or organizational consequences. This is a powerful definition. It's not just about avoiding wrongdoing, it's about proactively doing what is right. In simple, direct terms, as internal auditors, we are expected to tell the truth and do the right thing, even when it is uncomfortable, challenging, or difficult. Think about the pressures we can face: pressure from management to downplay a finding, pressure to overlook a control weakness because of tight deadlines, or even personal reluctance to deliver unfavorable news. Integrity demands that we rise above these pressures, armed with facts and professional courage. It's also crucial to understand that integrity is the very foundation upon which the other principles of ethics and professionalism are built. These include objectivity, competency, due professional care, and confidentiality, all of which we will explore. Without integrity, these other principles cannot stand firm. The integrity of internal auditors is absolutely essential to establishing trust with our stakeholders and earning their respect. If they cannot trust our integrity, they cannot trust our work. Now let's break down the standards that support this vital principle of integrity. Standard 1.1, honesty and professional courage. This standard directly operationalizes the principle of integrity. Requirement 1, internal auditors must perform their work with honesty and professional courage. Honesty means being truthful, sincere, and free from deceit. In our work, this translates to presenting findings factually without embellishment or minimization. It means admitting mistakes if they occur and ensuring our reports are a fair representation of the situation. Professional courage is the fortitude to stand by our ethical principles and professional judgments, especially in the face of adversity. It's about having the strength to make difficult calls, to deliver unwelcome news, and to protect the integrity of the audit process, even if it means challenging senior individuals or established norms. This courage is not recklessness, it is informed by facts, standards, and our professional responsibility Or consider a scenario where an audit uncovers significant non-compliance in a critical area and there's pressure from management to soften the report's tone or delay its issuance. Professional courage, grounded in honesty, requires the auditor to present the findings accurately and ensure appropriate escalation. Requirement 2. Internal auditors must be truthful, accurate, clear, open, and respectful in all professional relationships and communications, even when expressing skepticism or offering an opposing viewpoint. Well, let's break this down. Truthful, our communications must be factual and devoid of falsehoods. Accurate, information presented must be correct and precise. This requires diligence in our work and verification of facts. Clear, our reports and verbal communications should be easy to understand, avoiding ambiguity or jargon that might confuse the audience. Open, this implies a willingness to share information appropriately and not withhold relevant details. Transparency in our processes and findings builds trust. Respectful, even when delivering challenging news or disagreeing with others, our demeanor must always be professional and respectful. This helps maintain constructive relationships. The standard also emphasizes that internal auditors must not make false, misleading, or deceptive statements, nor conceal or omit findings or other pertinent information from communications. This is a critical ethical line. Omitting a material finding because it's uncomfortable to report is a direct violation of this standard and undermines integrity. Furthermore, internal auditors must disclose all material facts known to them that, if not disclosed, could affect the organization's ability to make well-informed decisions. Materiality here refers to information that is significant enough to influence the decisions of users of our reports. This places a significant responsibility on us to exercise professional judgment in determining what is material. Requirement 3. Internal auditors must exhibit professional courage by communicating truthfully and taking appropriate action even when confronted by dilemmas and difficult situations. This reiterates the importance of courage, linking it directly to truthful communication and appropriate action. Dilemmas are common in auditing, perhaps a conflict between organizational loyalty and professional standards or pressure to compromise independence. Difficult situations might involve dealing with uncooperative auditees, uncovering sensitive issues, or navigating complex political environments within the organization. Appropriate action could mean escalating an issue, refusing to compromise on standards, or even in extreme cases, resigning from an engagement if ethical principles cannot be upheld. The key is that action must be taken, and it must be guided by our professional and ethical obligations. Requirement 4 for the Chief Audit Executive. The Chief Audit Executive must maintain a work environment where internal auditors feel supported when expressing legitimate evidence-based engagement results, whether favorable or unfavorable. This is a crucial responsibility for the CAE. Auditors need to know they have the backing of their leadership when they present findings that might be critical or unpopular. How can a CAE foster such an environment? Leading by example, demonstrating integrity and professional courage themselves, open communication channels, encouraging auditors to discuss concerns and challenges openly without fear of retribution, providing protection, shielding auditors from undue pressure or intimidation, reinforcing ethical values, regularly communicating the importance of ethics and integrity within the function, supporting professional development, ensuring auditors are well trained in ethical decision-making and conflict resolution. Without this support, auditors might be hesitant to raise difficult issues which would severely compromise the effectiveness and integrity of the internal audit function. Standard 1.2, Organizations' Ethical Expectations. This standard addresses the auditor's relationship with the ethical framework of the organization they serve. Requirement 1. Internal auditors must understand, respect, meet, and contribute to the legitimate and ethical expectations of the organization and must be able to recognize conduct that is contrary to those expectations. Understand this requires auditors to actively learn about the organization's stated ethical values, its code of conduct, policies, and any industry-specific ethical guidelines it adheres to. Respect. Auditors should acknowledge and respect these legitimate ethical expectations, even if they might personally hold slightly different views, as long as they don't conflict with our professional standards. Meet. Our conduct must align with these organizational ethical expectations in our daily work. Contribute. This is an active role. Auditors can contribute by promoting ethical behavior, providing insights on strengthening the ethical culture, and incorporating ethical considerations into their audit work. For example, an audit of a sales process might consider not just efficiency but also ethical sales practices. Recognize contrary conduct. This requires vigilance and an ability to identify actions or behaviors within the organization that deviate from its stated ethical standards. This might involve recognizing red flags for fraud, unethical decision-making, or a culture that condones cutting corners. Requirement 2. Internal auditors must encourage and promote an ethics-based culture in the organization. This goes beyond simply conforming. It calls for a proactive stance. How can auditors do this? By consistently demonstrating ethical behavior themselves, by incorporating ethical considerations into audit scopes and objectives, by recommending improvements to ethical controls and processes, by providing training or awareness sessions on ethical risks, if appropriate and within their mandate, by being a resource for management and employees on ethical matters. The standard continues, if internal auditors identify behavior within the organization that is inconsistent with the organization's ethical expectations, they must report the concern according to applicable policies and procedures. This reporting obligation is critical. Auditors cannot turn a blind eye to unethical conduct. The reporting should follow established internal channels, which might include reporting to management, the ethics officer, legal counsel, or directly to the audit committee or board, depending on the nature and severity of the issue and the organization's policies. Standard 1.3, Legal and Ethical Behavior. This standard broadens the scope to include adherence to laws and ensuring our conduct is not discreditable. Requirement 1. Internal auditors must not engage in or be a party to any activity that is illegal or discreditable to the organization or the profession of internal auditing, or that may harm the organization or its employees. Illegal activity. This is straightforward. Auditors must comply with all applicable laws. Discreditable activity. This is broader. It refers to actions that could damage the reputation or standing of the internal audit profession or the organization. This requires professional judgment. Examples might include conflicts of interest, misuse of confidential information, or any behavior that casts doubt on the auditor's integrity or objectivity. Harm to the organization or employees. Our actions should not cause undue harm. This doesn't mean we shy away from reporting difficult truths, but it does mean we act responsibly and professionally. Requirement 2. Internal auditors must understand and abide by the laws and/or regulations relevant to the industry and jurisdictions in which the organization operates, including making disclosures as required. This emphasizes the need for auditors to have a working knowledge of the legal and regulatory landscape relevant to their organization. This can be complex for multinational organizations operating in diverse industries. Making disclosures as required refers to legal or regulatory obligations to report certain information to external authorities, for example, reporting certain financial irregularities or environmental violations. Auditors must be aware of these obligations. Requirement 3. If internal auditors identify legal or regulatory violations, they must report such incidents to individuals or entities that have the authority to take appropriate action, as specified in laws, regulations, and applicable policies and procedures. Similar to reporting unethical conduct, identified legal or regulatory violations must be reported through appropriate channels. The specific reporting path will depend on the organization's policies, the nature of the violation, and applicable laws. This could involve reporting to senior management, the legal department, the compliance function, the audit committee, or in some cases directly to regulatory bodies if mandated by law or if internal channels are ineffective or compromised. Principle 1. Demonstrate integrity and its supporting standards. Honesty and professional courage, organizations' ethical expectations, and legal and ethical behavior set a very high bar for us as internal auditors. They demand not just technical proficiency, but a strong moral compass and the courage to act upon it. This is the foundation of our credibility and the value we bring to our organizations. Principle 2, maintain objectivity. We now move to the second core principle. Principle 2, maintain objectivity. The standard states internal auditors maintain an impartial and unbiased attitude when performing internal audit services and making decisions. What exactly is objectivity in the context of internal auditing? The IIA defines objectivity as an unbiased mental attitude that allows internal auditors to make professional judgments, fulfill their responsibilities, and achieve the purpose of internal auditing without compromise. This unbiased mental attitude is critical. It means we approach our work without preconceived notions, personal biases, or allowing our judgments to be swayed by the influence of others. The standard also notes that an independently positioned internal audit function supports internal auditors' ability to maintain objectivity. Organizational independence, which we'll discuss under the Global Internal Audit Standards domain related to governance, is a key enabler of individual objectivity. Standard 2.1, individual objectivity. This standard focuses on the personal responsibility of each auditor to uphold objectivity. Requirement 1, internal auditors must maintain professional objectivity when performing all aspects of internal audit services. All aspects is comprehensive. This means objectivity is required during audit planning, for example, selecting audit areas based on risk, not personal preference or management pressure, and during field work, for example, gathering and evaluating evidence impartially, and during reporting, for example, presenting findings fairly and without bias. It applies to both assurance and advisory services. Even when providing advice, our recommendations should be based on an objective assessment of what is best for the organization, not influenced by personal relationships or agendas. Requirement 2. Professional objectivity requires internal auditors to apply an impartial and unbiased mindset and make judgments based on balanced assessments of all relevant circumstances. Impartial and unbiased mindset, this is the core. It means striving to be free from personal biases, conscious or unconscious, that could affect our work. This includes biases related to past experiences, personal relationships, cultural background, or even a desire to please management. Balanced assessments. Our judgments should be based on a fair and thorough consideration of all relevant facts and evidence, not just those that support a particular viewpoint. This means actively seeking out diverse perspectives and challenging our own assumptions. The standard continues, internal auditors must be aware of and manage potential biases. This is a call for self-awareness. We must recognize that biases can exist and take active steps to manage them. This might involve techniques like seeking peer review, using structured decision-making frameworks, or consciously challenging our initial conclusions. Standard 2.2, Safeguarding Objectivity. This standard provides practical guidance on how to protect our objectivity from various threats. Requirement 1. Internal auditors must recognize and avoid or mitigate actual, potential, and perceived impairments to objectivity. Actual impairments, situations where objectivity is compromised. Potential impairments, situations where objectivity could be compromised. Perceived impairments, situations where, even if objectivity is not actually compromised, a reasonable third party might perceive it to be compromised. Perceptions matter because they affect the credibility of our work. The actions are to avoid such situations where possible, or if unavoidable, to mitigate the impairment through safeguards. Requirement 2. Internal auditors must not accept any tangible or intangible item, such as a gift, reward, or favor, that may impair or be presumed to impair objectivity. This is a clear prohibition. Accepting gifts, rewards, or significant favors from auditees or other stakeholders can create a sense of obligation or be perceived as an attempt to influence the audit. Organizations often have specific policies on gifts and entertainment which auditors must adhere to. The overriding principle is that nothing should be accepted that could compromise or appear to compromise our professional judgment. Even a small gift could be problematic if it's intended to influence or is perceived as such. Requirement 3. Internal auditors must avoid conflicts of interest and must not be unduly influenced by their own interest or the interest of others, including senior management or others in a position of authority, or by the political environment or other aspects of their surroundings. Conflicts of interest. These arise when an auditor's personal interests, financial, familial, etc., conflict or appear to conflict with their professional responsibilities to the organization. For example, auditing a department managed by a close relative would be a conflict of interest. Undue influence. This refers to pressure from others, for example, senior management demanding that a certain finding be suppressed, or being swayed by one's own personal gain, for example, hoping for a promotion from the department being audited. Political pressures within the organization can also be a source of undue influence. Objectivity requires us to resist such influences and base our work solely on evidence and professional judgment. Requirement 4. Specific scenarios regarding previous responsibilities and advisory services. This requirement outlines how to handle situations where an auditor might be asked to audit areas where they recently had operational responsibilities or where the internal audit function has provided advisory services. Internal auditors must refrain from assessing specific activities for which they were previously responsible. Objectivity is presumed to be impaired if an internal auditor provides assurance services for an activity for which the internal auditor had responsibility within the previous 12 months. This 12-month rule is a key safeguard. It recognizes that it's difficult to be objective when auditing one's own past work or decisions. If the internal audit function is to provide assurance services where it had previously performed advisory services, the chief audit executive must confirm that the nature of the advisory services does not impair objectivity and must assign resources such that individual objectivity is managed. Advisory services are different from assuming operational responsibility. However, if the advisory work was very extensive or involved making management decisions, objectivity in a subsequent assurance engagement could be impaired. The CAE needs to make this assessment. Assigning different auditors to the assurance engagement than those who performed the advisory work can help manage individual objectivity. Assurance engagements for functions over which the chief audit executive has responsibility must be overseen by an independent party outside the internal audit function. This is crucial if the CIE has operational responsibilities outside of internal audit, which is generally not recommended but can occur in some organizations. In such cases, any audits of those functions must be managed and reported by someone independent of the CIE to maintain objectivity, often directly to the audit committee or board. If internal auditors are to provide advisory services relating to activities for which they had previous responsibilities, they must disclose potential impairments to the party requesting the services before accepting the engagement. Transparency is key here. Even in an advisory role, past responsibilities could color judgment, and this potential must be disclosed. Requirement 5 for the Chief Audit Executive. The Chief Audit Executive must establish methodologies to address impairments to objectivity. Internal auditors must discuss impairments and take appropriate actions according to relevant methodologies. The CAE has a responsibility to create a framework for managing objectivity. This includes policies and procedures for identifying and disclosing potential impairments, guidelines on safeguards, for example, reassigning auditors, changing engagement scope, independent review, a process for auditors to discuss these issues with their supervisors or the CAE, a mechanism for resolving impairments effectively. Individual auditors have a duty to use these methodologies and proactively discuss any concerns about their objectivity. Standard 2.3, disclosing impairments to objectivity. This standard emphasizes the importance of transparency when objectivity is or may appear to be compromised. Requirement 1, if objectivity is impaired in fact or appearance, the details of the impairment must be disclosed promptly to the appropriate parties. Prompt disclosure is essential. It allows appropriate action to be taken to mitigate the impairment or manage the situation. Appropriate parties typically include the CAE and, depending on the situation, management of the activity under review, senior management, and the board or audit committee. Requirement 2 for individual auditors. If internal auditors become aware of an impairment that may affect their objectivity, they must disclose the impairment to the chief audit executive or a designated supervisor. This is an affirmative duty of every auditor. The standard continues, if the chief audit executive determines that an impairment is affecting an internal auditor's ability to perform duties objectively, the chief audit executive must discuss the impairment with the management of the activity under review, the board, and/or senior management, and determine the appropriate action to resolve the situation. The CAE takes the lead in managing the disclosed impairment, which might involve reassigning the auditor, modifying the scope of the audit, or implementing additional review procedures. Requirement 3, post-engagement discovery of impairment. If an impairment that affects the reliability or perceived reliability of the engagement findings, recommendations, and/or conclusions is discovered after an engagement has been completed, the chief audit executive must discuss the concern with the management of the activity under review, the board, senior management, and/or other affected stakeholders, and determine the appropriate actions to resolve the situation. This standard also notes, see also Standard 11.4 errors and omissions. This is a serious situation. If a completed audit is found to have been compromised by an impairment to objectivity, its conclusions may be unreliable. Appropriate actions could range from re-performing parts of the audit, issuing a revised report, or taking other steps to correct any misleading information. The key is open communication with stakeholders. Requirement 4, impairment of the chief audit executive's objectivity. If the objectivity of the chief audit executive is impaired in fact or appearance, the chief audit executive must disclose the impairment to the board. This standard also notes, see also Standard 7.1, organizational independence. The CIE is also subject to the requirements of objectivity. If the CIE's objectivity is impaired, for example due to a conflict of interest or undue pressure, this must be disclosed directly to the board or audit committee, to whom the CIE typically reports functionally. This allows the board to determine how to manage the CIE's impairment, perhaps by appointing an external party to oversee certain audits. Maintaining objectivity is fundamental to the credibility and value of internal audit. It requires constant vigilance, self-awareness, and a commitment to making impartial judgments based on facts free from undue influence or personal bias. Principle 3, demonstrate competency. The third principle we will examine is crucial for delivering quality audit services. Principle 3, demonstrate competency. The standard states, internal auditors apply the knowledge, skills, and abilities to fulfill their roles and responsibilities successfully. Demonstrating competency is not a static achievement, it's an ongoing commitment. It requires internal auditors to actively develop and apply the necessary knowledge, the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject, skills, proficiencies developed through training or experience, and abilities, the innate or acquired capacity to perform, to provide high-quality internal audit services. The IIA recognizes that internal auditors provide a diverse array of services from financial and operational audits to IT, compliance, and advisory engagements. Because of this diversity, the specific competencies needed by each internal auditor will naturally vary depending on their role, responsibilities, industry, and the nature of the engagements they undertake. In addition to possessing or taking steps to obtain the competencies needed to perform their assigned services, internal auditors also improve the overall effectiveness and quality of those services by actively pursuing professional development throughout their careers. This principle is about ensuring that we are not only qualified for the work we do today, but also prepared for the challenges of tomorrow. Standard 3.1, Competency. This standard elaborates on what it means to be competent as an internal auditor. Requirement 1. Internal auditors must possess or obtain the competencies to perform their responsibilities successfully. This is a foundational requirement. Auditors should not undertake work for which they are not competent. The standard clarifies that the required competencies include the knowledge, skills, and abilities suitable for one's job position and responsibilities commensurate with their level of experience. This means competency expectations will differ for a junior auditor versus a senior audit manager or a specialist auditor, for example, IT auditor, fraud auditor. Crucially, internal auditors must possess or develop knowledge of the IIA's Global Internal Audit Standards. Conformance with the standards is impossible without understanding them. Requirement 2. Internal auditors must engage only in those services for which they have or can attain the necessary competencies. This is an ethical safeguard. If an auditor lacks the specific knowledge or skills for a particular engagement, for example, a complex cybersecurity audit or an audit of a highly specialized technical area, they should not accept that assignment unless they can attain the required competency in a timely manner, for example, through training, research, or by working under close supervision of a competent individual, or unless competent resources are added to the team. Requirement 3, Individual auditor's responsibility. Each internal auditor is responsible for continually developing and applying the competencies necessary to fulfill their professional responsibilities. Competency is not a one-time achievement. The business environment, technologies, risks, and auditing techniques are constantly evolving. Therefore, each auditor has a personal responsibility for lifelong learning and professional development. This might involve formal training, self-study, mentoring, on-the-job experience, and active participation in professional organizations. Requirement 4, Chief Audit Executive's responsibility. Additionally, the Chief Audit Executive must ensure that the internal audit function collectively possesses the competencies to perform the internal audit services described in the Internal Audit Charter, or must obtain the necessary competencies. This also cross-references Standard 7.2 Chief Audit Executive Qualifications and Standard 10.2 Human Resources Management. While individual auditors are responsible for their personal development, the CAE has overall accountability for the competency of the internal audit function as a whole. This means the CAE must assess the collective skills and knowledge of the audit team against the demands of the internal audit plan and the organization's risk profile, identify any competency gaps, develop strategies to address these gaps, which might include hiring auditors with specialized skills, providing training and development opportunities for existing staff, co-sourcing or outsourcing certain audits to external specialists if the necessary competencies cannot be developed internally in a timely or cost-effective manner. The Internal Audit Charter, which outlines the function's purpose, authority, and responsibility, will dictate the range of services the function is expected to provide and thus the competencies required. This standard reinforces the commitment to lifelong learning. Requirement 1, internal auditors must maintain and continually develop their competencies to improve the effectiveness and quality of internal audit services. This emphasizes that CPD is not just about meeting minimum requirements, but about actively seeking to enhance the effectiveness and quality of the work we deliver. Internal auditors must pursue continuing professional development, including education and training. This can take many forms: attending conferences and seminars, taking courses online or in person, reading professional journals and research, participating in webinars, obtaining new certifications, or engaging in knowledge-sharing activities within the audit team or professional networks. Requirement 2 for certified auditors. Practicing internal auditors who have attained professional internal audit certifications must follow the continuing professional education policies and fulfill the requirements applicable to their certifications. Many professional certifications, such as the Certified Internal Auditor (CIA) designation offered by the IIA, require holders to complete a certain number of continuing professional education (CPE) hours annually or over a reporting cycle to maintain their certification. This standard makes it clear that fulfilling these CPE requirements is a mandatory part of demonstrating ongoing competency for certified internal auditors. Demonstrating competency is essential for internal auditors to provide valuable and credible assurance and advisory services. It requires a commitment from both individual auditors and the internal audit leadership to continuous learning and skill enhancement in a dynamic and complex world. Principle 4, exercise due professional care. Our fourth principle is Principle 4, exercise due professional care. The standard states, internal auditors apply due professional care in planning and performing internal audit services. What does due professional care mean? The standards tell us that it requires conformance with the Global Internal Audit Standards, consideration of the nature, circumstances, and requirements of the work to be performed, application of professional skepticism to critically assess and evaluate information. Essentially, due professional care implies that internal auditors must plan and perform their work with the diligence, judgment, and skepticism that would be expected of a prudent and competent internal auditor under similar circumstances. It means being thorough, thoughtful, and appropriately critical in our approach. It's also important to note what due professional care doesn't mean. When exercising due professional care, internal auditors perform in the best interests of those receiving internal audit services but are not expected to be infallible. We are human, and mistakes can occur even when due care is exercised. The standard is one of reasonable prudence and competence, not perfection. Standard 4.1, conformance with the Global Internal Audit Standards. This standard links due professional care directly to adherence to our professional standards. Requirement 1, internal auditors must plan and perform internal audit services in accordance with the Global Internal Audit Standards. This is a fundamental expectation. The Global Internal Audit Standards, the standards, provide the framework of principles and requirements for the professional practice of internal auditing. Adherence to these standards is a hallmark of professionalism and due care. Requirement 2 for the internal audit function. The internal audit function's methodologies must be established, documented, and maintained in alignment with the standards. Internal auditors must follow the standards and the internal audit function's methodologies when planning and performing internal audit services and communicating results. This means the internal audit function should have its own documented audit manual or set of methodologies, for example, for risk assessment, planning, fieldwork, reporting, that are consistent with the Global Internal Audit Standards. Individual auditors are then expected to follow both the overarching standards and their function-specific methodologies. Requirement 3, when using other requirements, if the standards are used in conjunction with requirements issued by other authoritative bodies, internal audit communications must also cite the use of the other requirements as appropriate. Sometimes internal auditors may need to comply with other standards or requirements in addition to the IIA standards, for example, government auditing standards, specific industry regulations. If so, this should be acknowledged in audit reports. Requirement 4, when laws or regulations prohibit conformance. If laws or regulations prohibit internal auditors or the internal audit function from conforming with any part of the standards, conformance with all other parts of the standards is required and appropriate disclosures must be made. This acknowledges that in rare cases, local laws or regulations might conflict with a specific part of the standards. In such situations, the law or regulation takes precedence for that specific part, but auditors must still conform with all other parts of the standards and disclose the nature of the non-conformance and the reason for it. Requirement 5, when unable to conform for other reasons. When internal auditors are unable to conform with a requirement, the Chief Audit Executive must document and communicate a description of the circumstance, alternative actions taken, the impact of the actions, and the rationale. This also cross-references requirements related to disclosing non-conformance in Standards 8.3 Quality, 12.1 Internal Quality Assessment, and 15.1 Final Engagement Communication. This covers situations not due to legal prohibition but where conformance might not be possible, for example, resource limitations severely impacting scope. The CIE has a responsibility to document such instances, the reasons any alternative approach is used, and the impact on the engagement. This transparency is key. Standard 4.2, Due Professional Care, Specific Considerations. This standard details the specific considerations that auditors must assess when exercising due professional care. Requirement 1, internal auditors must exercise due professional care by assessing the nature, circumstances, and requirements of the services to be provided, including. This means that before and during an engagement, auditors need to think critically about many factors: the organization's strategy and objectives, How does the area being audited relate to the organization's overall goals? What are the strategic risks? The interests of those for whom internal audit services are provided and the interests of other stakeholders? Who are the primary users of the audit report? What are their expectations and concerns? Are there other stakeholders whose interests should be considered? Adequacy and effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control processes. This is often the core focus of our assurance work. We need to assess these GRC processes critically. Cost relative to potential benefits of the internal audit services to be performed. Audit resources are finite. Due care involves ensuring that the scope and depth of audit work are justified by the potential benefits, for example, risk reduction, process improvement, cost savings, extent and timeliness of work needed to achieve the engagement's objectives. We need to plan sufficient work to meet our objectives and ensure it's completed in a timely manner to be relevant. Relative complexity, materiality, or significance of risks to the activity under review. More complex material or significant risk areas will generally require more extensive audit attention. Probability of significant errors, fraud, non-compliance, and other risks that might affect objectives, operations, or resources. Our audit procedures should be designed to consider the likelihood of such significant issues. While internal audit is not primarily a fraud detection function, we must be alert to the risk of fraud. Use of appropriate techniques, tools, and technology. Due care involves selecting and using audit techniques, for example, data analytics, sampling methods, and tools that are appropriate for the engagement and the environment being audited. Exercising due professional care in these assessments requires auditors to be diligent, apply sound professional judgment, and tailor their audit approach to the specific circumstances of each engagement. Standard 4.3, Professional Skepticism. A critical component of due professional care is professional skepticism. Requirement 1. Internal auditors must exercise professional skepticism when planning and performing internal audit services. Professional skepticism is an attitude that includes a questioning mind and a critical assessment of audit evidence. It doesn't mean being distrustful or overly confrontational, but it does mean not accepting information at face value without appropriate corroboration or critical evaluation. Requirement 2. How to exercise professional skepticism. To exercise professional skepticism, internal auditors must maintain an attitude that includes inquisitiveness, be curious, ask probing questions, the why and how, and explore issues beyond the surface level. Critically assess the reliability of information and consider the source of information, its nature, and whether it is corroborated by other evidence. Don't just accept what you're told, verify it where necessary. Be straightforward and honest when raising concerns and asking questions about inconsistent information. If information appears contradictory or doesn't make sense, auditors have a responsibility to raise these concerns and seek clarification in a professional manner. Seek additional evidence to make a judgment about information and statements that might be incomplete, inconsistent, false, or misleading. Skepticism prompts us to dig deeper when faced with information that seems questionable. We shouldn't jump to conclusions, but seek further evidence to form a sound judgment. Exercising due professional care, including professional skepticism and strict conformance with the standards, is what enables internal auditors to perform their work to a high level of quality and to provide credible and reliable assurance and advice to their organizations. Principle 5, maintain confidentiality. The fifth and final principle in this domain is Principle 5, maintain confidentiality. The standard states internal auditors use and protect information appropriately. This principle is of paramount importance because, as the standard notes, internal auditors have unrestricted access to the data, records, and other information necessary to fulfill the internal audit mandate. This often means we are entrusted with information that is highly confidential, sensitive and not for public disclosure, proprietary, valuable intellectual property or trade secrets of the organization, and/or personally identifiable information, PII, that is subject to privacy laws and ethical considerations. This information can come in many forms: physical documents, digital files, and even information derived from oral communication, such as discussions in formal or informal meetings. The core expectation is that internal auditors must respect the value and ownership of information they receive by using it only for professional purposes and protecting it from unauthorized access or disclosure internally and externally. Standard 5.1, Use of information. This standard addresses how auditors should use the information they acquire. Requirement 1, internal auditors must follow the relevant policies, procedures, laws, and regulations when using information. The information must not be used for personal gain or in a manner contrary or detrimental to the organization's legitimate and ethical objectives. Follow relevant rules. This includes the organization's own information handling policies, data security procedures, and any applicable laws or regulations concerning data privacy or specific types of sensitive information, for example, health information, financial data. No personal gain. This is a strict ethical prohibition. Auditors must never use confidential or sensitive information obtained during their work for personal benefit, financial or otherwise. This includes insider trading or using information to gain an advantage for oneself or others, not contrary or detrimental to legitimate objectives. The information should only be used to fulfill the audit mandate and support the organization's legitimate and ethical goals. It should not be used to harm the organization, its reputation, or its employees unless there is a legal or professional obligation to disclose information related to wrongdoing. Standard 5.2, Protection of Information. This standard focuses on the auditor's responsibility to safeguard the information they handle. Requirement 1, internal auditors must be aware of their responsibilities for protecting information and demonstrate respect for the confidentiality, privacy, and ownership of information acquired when performing internal audit services or as the result of professional relationships. This requires a conscious awareness of information security and privacy principles. Auditors must understand the sensitivity of the information they are dealing with and treat it with the utmost care and respect. Requirement 2. Internal auditors must understand and abide by the laws, regulations, policies, and procedures related to confidentiality, information privacy, and information security that apply to the organization and internal audit function. This reinforces the need for knowledge of applicable data protection frameworks like GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, internal security policies, and any specific confidentiality requirements related to the industry or data types being handled. Requirement 3, Specific considerations for the internal audit function. Considerations specifically relevant to the internal audit function include custody, retention, and disposal of engagement records. The internal audit function must have secure processes for managing its working papers and engagement records both during and after the audit. This includes secure storage, defined retention periods complying with legal and organizational requirements, and secure methods for disposing of records when they are no longer needed. Release of engagement records to internal and external parties. There must be clear policies and procedures governing who can access audit records and under what circumstances. Release to external parties, for example, external auditors, regulators, usually requires specific authorization. Handling of, access to, or copies of confidential information when it is no longer needed. Auditors must ensure that once confidential information obtained for an audit is no longer required for that engagement or for record-keeping purposes, it is securely handled, returned, or destroyed according to policy. Requirement 4. Internal auditors must not disclose confidential information to unauthorized parties unless there is a legal or professional responsibility to do so. This is a cornerstone of confidentiality. Unauthorized parties can include individuals within the organization who do not have a legitimate need to know, as well as any external parties. The exception, unless there is a legal or professional responsibility to do so, covers situations where auditors may be required by law to report certain information, for example, to regulatory bodies, or where professional standards might compel disclosure in specific circumstances, for example, to prevent a significant imminent harm, though such situations are rare and require careful judgment and often legal consultation. Requirement 5. Internal auditors must manage the risk of exposing or disclosing information inadvertently. This means being careful in our daily work to prevent accidental breaches of confidentiality. Examples include securing laptops and mobile devices, being cautious about discussing confidential matters in public places, ensuring sensitive documents are not left unattended, using secure methods for transmitting electronic information, being mindful of who might overhear conversations or see computer screens. Requirement 6 for the Chief Audit Executive. The Chief Audit Executive must ensure that the internal audit function and individuals assisting the internal audit function adhere to the same protection requirements. The CAE is responsible for establishing and maintaining appropriate controls within the internal audit function to safeguard information. This includes ensuring that all team members, as well as any guest auditors, contractors, or co-sourced resources working with the internal audit function, understand and comply with these confidentiality requirements. Maintaining confidentiality is essential for building and preserving the trust that organizations place in their internal auditors. A breach of confidentiality can have severe consequences for the organization, for individuals whose data is exposed, and for the reputation of the internal audit profession. We have now covered the 5 core principles of Domain II: ethics and professionalism, integrity, objectivity, competency, due professional care, and confidentiality. along with their supporting standards and requirements from the IIA's Global Internal Audit Standards. The document also includes an acknowledgement section where internal auditors can sign to demonstrate that they have read, understood, and agreed to conform with these requirements. This is a good practice for internal audit functions to implement to reinforce the importance of these ethical and professional obligations. The final part of the document provides information about the Institute of Internal Auditors, a disclaimer, and copyright information, which are standard for EEA publications. Conclusion to Domain 2, Ethics and Professionalism. As we conclude this extensive exploration of Domain 2, Ethics and Professionalism from the IIA's Global Internal Audit Standards, it's clear that these principles and standards are not merely a list of rules to memorize. They represent the very soul of our profession. They are the ethical compass and the professional bedrock that guide our actions, shape our judgments, and define our value to the organizations we serve. Integrity demands honesty and courage, even in difficult situations. Objectivity requires an unbiased mindset, free from conflicts of interest and undue influence. Competency compels us to continuously develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to perform our duties effectively. Exercising due professional care means applying diligence, judgment, and professional skepticism in all our work while conforming to our standards. And maintaining confidentiality obliges us to protect the sensitive information entrusted to us. Conformance with these standards is not optional. It is a fundamental requirement for every internal auditor, every chief audit executive, and every internal audit function. It is through our unwavering commitment to these principles of ethics and professionalism that we earn and maintain the trust of our stakeholders, contribute to an ethical organizational culture, and ensure that the internal audit profession continues to be a respected and valued partner in governance, risk management, and control. This deep understanding and consistent application of ethics and professionalism are what truly distinguish a professional internal auditor. Thank you for watching, and as always, continue learning, stay curious, and we'll see you next video.